If you go all into a new region in a new country, the amount of investment risk and infrastructure required is quite significant.
Yes.
I think hiring is a low risk proposition to where you can accomplish both. What do you think will define the next era of global leadership?
Oh, we're going to play this back in 2 years or
Yeah.
3 years? Okay. So I think, there's a huge component here of empathy, listening, cultural understanding, like seeking to understand, asking questions, right? Like humility. I think as I think about building, if you're thinking about being a global leader, if you're there long term, you've got to give up some accountability in some ways and responsibility to say like, hey, I don't get to make all the decisions, and some point I get to be an input. At some point I get to be an input to that. And we got to make sure we're aligned. We have to have shared goals. We need to all be rowing in the same direction. But ultimately, if I have a counterpart in India and, he or she may be responsible for actually leading those individuals on a day-to-day basis, sure, I'm going to want to interview and have input into that process, but I no longer have the decision rights on who gets hired, right? Because if things are going well, congratulate that leader. If things aren't going well, it's the leader who's accountable, who, will chat and try to figure out a better path forward. But ultimately, you have to be sort of humble enough to say, okay, it's a partnership now, right? Yeah. I don't get to hold all those reins, and really having close collaboration and seeking to understand. Because as an example, things might work slightly different if you're trying to go through a talent acquisition process in the U.S. versus India, as an example. All of the steps are there, right? But sometimes they're in a slightly different order, or the expectation of talent in a certain market is, you're not, I'm going to interview you in the U.S. and then in a week or so, you might get an offer. In other markets, it's like, I expect an offer in 24 hours if things are going well, right? And that's what's happening across an entire country. So you're not competitive if you're not adjusting. So again, similar steps, slight nuances, hard to understand from the outside unless you're working with those partners and listening and asking.
I couldn't agree more. And I think leadership of old was really about like process, methodology, strategy, and systems. Like if you had experience with that, you know how to go into a new environment, operate, scale, and execute.
Right.
I think where you're going, what I hear from you saying is you're going to need to adapt. The next era of global leadership is truly regional knowledge base. You're going to need to understand the cultural difference, the different dynamics, how sales methodology may differ, support methodology may differ, right. Talent acquisition significantly different around the world. Notice periods are different, right. Contracts are different.
Very different.
So I think what was a typical systems, strategy, methodology play is really going to morph into the demand of global leaders to truly understand the nuances of these regions.
Yes.
Otherwise, I don't believe you'd have the ability to continually drive long-term scale.
Agree. It brings up the conversation around sort of culture and values, right?
Yeah.
So, I think it's really important to have values alignment, right? Across different, countries or regions. That's really critical. You have to understand and actually lean in and have really good conversations about where you flex culturally, like where you're flexing maybe your processes and things like that to meet cultural demands so that you can remain competitive and remain an employer choice in those markets. But that doesn't actually mean that you just go, well, whatever you'd like to do culturally, we trust that makes sense, right? So it's that partnership, and it's the sort of, sometimes you feel like maybe you're feeling around in the dark a little bit together to figure out, okay, where do we flex and where do we stay consistent across the board? Because, flexing a little bit for, say, the operational sort of disruption or inefficiency it would cause isn't actually worth it in the end once you have the conversation. Yep. So, you're not always chasing perfect, but you really do have to kind of constantly be in contact and working together and have shared goals to understand what are we trying to achieve and how do we best get there.
I think you have to have an operational cadence. Like, what are the things you must do every week, month, quarter?
Yes.
That cadence is so critical, especially on a global stage. Time zones can become very difficult to manage. So you really have to have the right cadence first. Then you have to, I've always been a big believer in like the rules of engagement, which is just to what you were saying about like who owns what.
Yeah.
and having that healthy balance of partnership and empowerment, but also the ability to challenge the status quo and make sure there's proper guardrails in place to ensure
Yeah.
value and consistency.